Hello, everybody. Currently, the date is May 29th, 2021, and today I'm going to be talking about my 2024 election prediction. Let's just get straight into it. Firstly, take a look at the Democratic Party. It would be very likely that the presumptive nominee for the Democrats would be President Biden. Traditionally, most presidents run for re-election, and Biden has said that he is thinking about it and that he's contemplating about it. And so it would be likely that in the 2024 scenario, Biden would be the nominee from the Democratic Party. The Republican Party is where things get a little more interesting. So the nominee that I have would be President Trump, former President Trump. But it's important to note that President Trump still has a very great influence in the Republican Party. He dictates elections and he works a lot with them, and so he has lots of influence and power within the Republican Party. It's important to note that that is generally the consensus. And if Trump were to run, and he is saying that he has said that he is seriously contemplating it, if Trump were to run in 2024, it is very, very likely that he actually gets the nomination for the Republicans. He has a stranglehold on the party right now, and it would be very difficult for any other potential candidate to fill in that spot and be competitive against him. It's important to note that there are definitely a couple of candidates that are looking to get this Republican nomination for 2024. People such as Ted Cruz, Governor DeSantis, Ron DeSantis of Florida, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, Marco Rubio, Tim Scott, maybe even Rick Scott, and then obviously former President Trump, or maybe even one of his sons. And so it's important to note the list of people that are in the spot and contention for the Republican nominee. However, if Trump were to run, it is incredibly likely that he wins the nomination just because of the power and influence he has on the party. But it's important to note that in terms of maybe even vice presidential candidates or people that are eager to run, a good example could be Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. Actually, Governor Ron DeSantis is very, very favored and actually gained in popularity from the COVID-19 pandemic and his influence within the Republican Party. A lot of people praised Governor DeSantis of Florida for his handling of the pandemic. A lot of Florida had minimal mask regulations, and Governor DeSantis opposed many things such as vaccine passports and a lot of pandemic-related issues. And so it's important to know that Governor DeSantis actually is a special favored person within the party that could potentially run if President Trump doesn't. But in the current scenario, it's important to understand that President Trump would also be the likely Republican nominee. Let's get straight into the map. So I'm just going to label all of these safe states. These are all states that are almost safe for their respective parties. And so it would require massive amounts of resources or just advertisements or campaigns for these states to even become competitive or flip for the other side. And so the state of Washington would be for the Democrats, the state of Oregon, the state of California. Those are all states that side with the Democrats. The state of Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, North Dakota, South Dakota. We'll skip Nebraska for a little bit. Kansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana. Those are all fairly safe states for the Republican Party. Colorado, label Alaska as a safe state for the Republican Party. Minnesota, Illinois, South Carolina, West Virginia, and then the Northeast states. These are all pretty favored for the Democratic Party. State of New York, New Hampshire, and the state of Maine would be for the Democrats. We'll just take out the second districts, and then the state of Nebraska would be for the Republicans other than the second district. I'll go ahead and label the second district of Nebraska for the Democrats. It's unlikely that Trump wins this district. He won it in his 2016 election, but he lost it in the most current 2020 election. And that is the same thing that goes for the state of Maine. It's likely that Trump wins this, actually. Trump won both of these, won this district, the 2nd District for Maine, both times in his elections, and it's likely that he would for this one, even though Maine, and considering that Maine actually voted for a Republican in their lower elections. And so it's important to note that that would likely be for the Republicans. But let's just take a look at these blank states here that I want to talk about from West Coast to East Coast. Let's start with the state of Nevada. So I would categorize the state of Nevada as a Democratic state. It is always competitive, though, and it's important to note that the margin that Biden won by was only about 2.4%. And so it's important to note that Trump only lost his state by about 30,000 votes. And so this is a state that could very definitely go for the Republican Party if they spend some resources here. But it's unlikely that that would happen, especially because a lot of Republican support is overlooked in the state of Nevada. Republicans always do better than they are supposed to do. But it is never usually enough for an actual victory, considering that the state is always traditionally close, especially in the 2016 election it was close, and in the 2020 election it was still close. But for some reason this state does side with the Democrats on a general scale, even though specific cities tend to go in different directions. But it's likely that the state of Nevada goes for the Democrats. The next state that we're going to look at is the state of Arizona. So this state actually can get paired with the state of Georgia. This state was a traditional Republican state. Trump won the state of Arizona in his 2016 election. However, he lost the state of Arizona, yes, by a very, very small margin, by about 0.3%, but it still happened. And a large part of this was because late Senator John McCain's wife actually supported President Biden in the state. Her endorsement went to President Biden and not President Trump, even though President Trump was the Republican candidate, right? He is a person that's on the same party as John McCain. And so it's important to know that that is one of the reasons why this state flipped. And I'll talk about another one of the reasons why this state went Democratic when I get to the state of Georgia. But it's important to note that a lot of people in the state of Arizona care more about John McCain and regional leadership positions within different parties more than the national level. And so it's likely that this state would become more solidified for the Democrats in 2024. The next state we're going to take a look at is the state of Texas. And Texas is something that should be alarming for the Republican Party. The state of Texas went to Donald Trump by 6%. The state of Texas went to Mitt Romney and President Bush by double digits. And I'm pretty sure it went for Bush and Romney by about 20-odd%. And so it's important to know that 6% is nothing compared to those percentages, especially because the state of Texas gained an electoral vote from the 2020 census. And so do I think the state of Texas will go for the Republicans in 2024? Yes. But will it be closer than the 2020 election? That is also a yes. I think that the state of Texas will go to the Republicans by 1 or 2%. Because when you look at it, right, the state of Texas was 6% when it went double digits in the 20s for Mitt Romney. That is a very, very big shift to the left. And I'll also get more into that when I cover the Rust Belt and Georgia. But it's important to note that the Democrats will likely win Texas in 2028 or 2032, whichever of those is, whichever it happens in, it will be inevitable because the state of Texas is gaining in population, and the cities are the cities of Houston, where a lot of Democratic voters from California and the Rust Belt are moving to Texas. If you look at Texas, the population is increasing, property rates and mortgages and stuff like that. Everything is increasing there. Texas is becoming more influential and more powerful and more wealthy at that as well, because a lot of these cities are becoming greater and greater in population, and Houston and other big cities in Texas are gaining in population very rapidly, which is a reason why Texas gained so many electoral votes in the most recent census. And so it's important to note that a lot of people from the north, northeast, northeastern United States and western United States, such as the states of California, are moving to Texas. And there's a variety of reasons behind that, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But let's go to the state of Wisconsin, which will actually include within the Rust Belt. So the state of Wisconsin went to President Biden by a 0.7%, right? If you look at these statistics, Trump only lost the state of Wisconsin by 20,000 votes. That is very marginal considering over 3 million people voted. So of the 3 million people that voted in the state of Wisconsin, only 20,000 made the difference in which state, in which candidate it went for. And so it's important to note that a lot of and this applies to the entirety of the Rust Belt. The state of Michigan and Pennsylvania also apply this same statistic, that a lot of these voters are leaving these northern parts of the United States and traveling south to Texas, Florida. Florida gained multiple electoral votes this time around. And a lot of these traditionally Democratic voters from Detroit, from Philly, are moving down to Texas, to Houston, and other places there. And so that's why I would actually categorize the state of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania for the Republicans in the 2024 election. Because, I mean, if you look at the margins, right, Biden only won the state of Pennsylvania by 1.2%. And if you go back to election day, you can remember at one point they're at that election week, I guess we'll call it, Trump was up 16% in the state of Pennsylvania. The state was incredibly close, and it would not be very unsurprising if Trump actually carried these states in the 2024 election, because Wisconsin was 0.7%, and it only mattered 20,000 voters made the difference, and same with the state of Pennsylvania. So I would not be surprised if those states went to the Republican Party, because a lot of those Democratic voters that were in those big cities are moving south. And then, so the next state that I'll actually skip Michigan, because I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'll move to the state of Ohio. Ohio has traditionally voted with the winner of the election, and it's been on a pretty long streak in recent political history. But the state of Ohio went to President Trump by 8%. That is unprecedented for this state. This state went to Obama, but pretty convincingly, and it shifted all the way to 8% for President Trump. This state goes to the Republicans, and this is surprising, especially considering the fact that this state used to be a swing state, but now we just can't categorize it as that, because it has overwhelmingly went for the Republican Party. Yes, is it in the grasp, and could it potentially go to the Democrats in the next election? It's possible, but will it? Likely? Probably not. The next state that we'll go to, I'll just go to the state of Florida. The state of Florida went to the Republican Party by about 3%. It went by about 2 points, north of 2%. But by no means does that make it a safe state. And that doesn't necessarily make it a Republican state in 2024. It's important to note that 2% is about, or 3% is about the same margin that Biden won Michigan by. And so if you think that Florida is safe for the Republicans, then you also have to assume that Michigan is safe for the Democrats. But why do I think Florida will go for the Republicans? Because, yes, has it gained a lot of people from the north that are moved down to the south and to Florida? Yes, but the fact that Trump was able to win by this percentage in Florida, which is such a swing state, right? I mean, it's been one of the closest states in modern political history. The fact that this state went by close to 3% is indicative of what is happening among population shifts and demographic shifts in that state. And so it is likely that the state of Florida actually does go to the Republican Party, but by no means is that close. And that state might only be won by maybe 1% or even less than 1%. And a big reason why Trump won this state is because of actually Latino voters. So white turnout was about average, actually. But Latino voters and Hispanic voters, not just in the state of Florida, even in the state of Texas, actually came out for President Trump. And I'll talk about why that is ironic, or why that isn't actually supported by why nobody expected that. Because one of the main reasons why this happened is because a lot of Latino voters and Hispanic voters were told things about President Trump that didn't end up happening, right? So a lot of the Democratic campaign in 2016 became this idea that President Trump was racist or sexist. Now, regardless of whether you believe that or not, it's important to note that that is where a lot of Democratic campaigns came from. That was their approach to President Trump. And it is maybe a reason why Trump won the 2016 election, because of this sort of misinformation campaign, and that the idea that Trump isn't a conventional politician. That is the reason why he won the 2016 election. But it's also important to note that a lot of Latino voters were told that they were going to be deported, or these like crazy things would happen to them. And when those things didn't happen, they agreed with President Trump. And they agreed that like they were told these certain things that just ended up not being true. And that is a part of the reason why a lot of these voters actually turned out for President Trump, and helped him and made this election a lot closer. The next state that we'll look at is the state of North Carolina. Trump won the state by about 1%, but by no means does that make it a Republican state, or even make it close, because the state of North Carolina will likely go for the Republicans, because it's important to note how it's always been close in the state of North Carolina, but the last time it was won by a Democrat was Obama in 2008. North Carolina has always been a very close state, but it's always sort of sided with the Republicans for the last couple of elections. And it is almost similar. It's kind of like the opposite of Nevada, except it's for the Republican Party, because Nevada always is competitive and close, but it just still always sides with the Democratic Party. And those are just tendencies that those states seem to have. The next state that I'll talk about is the state of Georgia. This state surprised a lot of us, because the state of Georgia was very, very close, but it was won by a Democrat. You have to remember, the state of Georgia is a traditionally conventional Republican state. Republicans win in the state of Georgia. But that just isn't what happened. White turnout was about average in the state of Georgia, and Joe Biden won a lot more of white voters than Hillary Clinton did. And a lot of African American voters in the states, in cities such as Atlanta and bigger cities, turned out for President Biden, because you have to remember what Trump's campaign was. Trump was the president of chaos. There was a lot of confusion that happened in the Trump campaign. When you look at the politics of it, Trump's policies were actually quite normal for a Republican president. He was largely like an average president, but his campaign and his presidency was associated with so much chaos and confusion that a lot of people didn't turn out for President Trump that should have. And that is the reason why he lost the election. But one part of that is because a lot of African American voters in those cities turned out heavily for Joe Biden. Joe Biden campaigned as the peacemaker, as the person to bring uniformity and peace back to America, because Trump had sort of created this chaos. And now, regardless of political ideologies or opinions, that is something that happened. And it's important to note that and take that, because that's how Joe Biden campaigned himself. And that's how he won the election, because he was the man of the people conventionally. And he was the politician that would restore peace back to America. And that is where he won the election. And that is where people turned out for him. And that's where people didn't turn out for President Trump. And so it's important to note, while Georgia was close, the state will go towards the Democrats in 2024. The state will become a Democratic state in the 2024 election. And that is because of turnout amongst marginalized populations and a plethora of reasons, but one being how Joe Biden campaigned himself and how Trump looks in the public eye. You have to remember that on election day, when people voted, Trump was at its best performance. Trump was the most successful in approval rating he's been in a very long time, since he took the oath of office. Trump had a pretty high uptick in approval rating, and the Trump that people voted for in November was not the Trump that people view now, especially after the Capitol insurrection and other moments. It's important to note that Trump's view and opinion, or I guess the view of opinion of people on Trump, has changed since Election Day. This brings me to my last state, the state of Michigan. This state, I think, will decide the election. Whichever way the state goes, it would decide the election. And you might think it might go for the Republicans, or that's where I would predict it, but that's actually, I'm not too sure. Especially because the state of Michigan, while yes, people are moving to southern states, and that is true, it is difficult to understand where the state will go, because 3% is nothing to laugh at in the state of Michigan. And this election becomes a question of, can Biden hold on to enough voters so that he can win this state? And whoever wins the state wins the election. If the Republicans win, they get 279 electoral votes and they win the election. But if the Democrats win, they get 274 and they win the election. So whichever way the state of Michigan goes becomes the winner of this election. And it's difficult. The state could go either way. It is truly a toss-up. It really just depends on, have enough Democratic voters that voted for Biden, have enough moved out. If enough have moved out, Trump would win the state. But if not everybody has left yet, then Trump would lose the state. Currently, I think that the Democrats will actually hold a very, very, very slight edge in the state of Michigan, because 3% in the state of Michigan is just nothing to laugh at. And I think that Biden will win the state by less than 1%. If Biden wins it, it would be incredibly close. And if Trump wins it, it would also be incredibly close. I mean, this state would be decided on like thousands. I mean, I'm talking very, very small numbers, especially because the state was already decided by 200,000 votes. I think that this state could be decided by less than 30,000 votes. And it is a big state. Almost 6 million people voted there. And so it's important to note why the state of Michigan could be the determiner for this election. But it is truly a toss-up. And whoever can win this state would likely win the election, assuming that the Republicans would win the state of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and the Democrats assume the other states. But thank you for watching. That's been my 2024 election prediction. I hope that everybody that can vote in 2024 does, because it's going to be a close election and your vote matters. And so it's important to understand and respect the American electoral process. And thank you for watching, and goodbye.